Hey guys. Hi, welcome to our Friday workshop. Thank you so much everyone for being here today. We're doing a really fun design. It's the boutique style pendant, which can also be earrings or a pin or anything else that you could think of that you like it to be. And it's really versatile. So we're going to go over the details of making this configuration. And once we've got this one made, we're going to show how to do the chain, because I thought this was a really neat, another versatile, could be lots of different things, great for gifting. So the class will have kind of like a part one, part two. We'll do the boutique pendant, and then we'll do some talking about chain and how to add it. But this pendant itself can be separated. It's made in two pieces. Hey, I see everyone saying hi. Hi guys. And it can be made of, oh, there I am. Okay, hi. I'll give you guys a proper hello. So yeah, I'm actually wearing my pendant today that I made, and I made these in so many colors, and these pieces can be, you could do so many things. So one of the thoughts I had, of course, I have all these thoughts right before class, right? Because I'm, refreshing, and I thought, how about this piece becoming a bracelet by connecting it, making a bunch just like it and connecting it, so many things. So we'll talk about that. We'll show how it's made, and just hopefully my goal will be to leave you with tons of ideas and lots of inspiration that you can take to the next level in your designs. All right, and so I've got some of the materials already on the mat here. I've got two different colors of SuperDuos, and I did that kind of mostly just for clarity. So we could, see our rows and tell our rows apart a little bit. Some of them have more than 2 layers, but it gives you a general idea. And then, of course, some bright colored size 11. And on the chain, we're going to need some chain and the pendant. Sorry, we'll need some size 6 beads. So size 6, size 11. And, SuperDuo is 1 or 2 colors or more. You can always change up the colors. I'm using some size 12 beading needles whenever I'm working with like a 2-hole SuperDuo bead, because you start to get that maneuverability thing happening. 12s can be kind of handy in that case, but I have worked with other needle sizes and it still works. So don't worry too much about it. This is the thread that I'm using today. It's the 0.006 Wildfire. And then just some other little things I have around here. I've got scissors to cut thread. I've got pliers that I'm going to be using for both flattening the end of the thread so we can thread our needle, and for jump rings to put our clasp on. And then last but not least, you need some rondelles. And the rondelles that I used, the size of them is a little bit important. So you can use any color you'd like. And Michael's has lots of them. That's the good news. There's tons of these rondelles. The ones that you're seeing here, they came in one of those, strand wall packs of 4, where you get like a bunch of them, right? And the ones we're going to use are these like 6 by 4 millimeter size. So if you're using strand wall, it's going to be, I believe it's the second to smallest size that's hanging on that card. There's a really tiny one, and then there's this one that's 6 by 4 millimeters. But lots of other possibilities are in store. So if you're looking in Michael's and you're on the strand wall, there's some that are, just like a single strand of rondelles. And of course, in your stash at home, if you're like me, you've got like bunches of beads and leftovers from projects that you did before, and just measure it and see roughly if that size will work for you. I think it's kind of a common rondelle size. So it's one of those beads that should be pretty easy to find. And I just kind of I swap up the colors. I'll work with whatever I find in my stash and just make it, make the seed beads work with it, right? Just because I want to use it up. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and get started with building the first piece. So there's a couple of things I was going to just walk you through really quick, just so you know what I'm doing in what order. The first step is building this little bottom piece. You could build the top piece first if you wanted to. It'll work either way, but I've been kind of in the habit of building this one first and then building this piece. And at the last step on this piece, we join them. And then after you join them, we just weave in the thread and start thinking about you know, what is it going to be? Is it going to be a chain that's attached to it? You could put a jump ring. If you didn't want to build a chain, you could just put a jump ring up here and then run a ball chain through it, or an ornate chain that you've purchased somewhere. Here's the earring version. These are the colors that just like, they pop, they're beautiful. And this is that kind of like Aurora Borealis kind of finish of, I can't even describe it. It's got like a rainbow hue to it. Again, that's on the strand wall at Michael's. We used it in a couple of our projects earlier this year, and the sort of leftovers I had. But yeah, so just play with colors, play with your design, and try out all your ideas and see what you like. So starting with part 1. You don't need a lot of thread for each of these sections because they're built individually. So like 35 inches of threads, all you'll need for this first step. Get that out of the way and bring my mat a little closer so you guys can see what I'm doing. Okay, get a little closer. It's better scale there. Okay, so getting my thread ready. And I forgot to mention, because we're you guys are the folks that are in our classes a lot, so you know all of the drill. But if you do have anything happen in class where tech support is needed, we have Felicia's with us today, and Carmi is also in the chat as well. And we don't have Millie today, but she'll be back next week. And here's my needle. I just flattened the end so I can get through my needle a little easier. And then I always just kind of pull down maybe 7 or so inches, making the length a little more manageable. And for the first part, I only need one of my rondelles, so I'm just going to keep one out. And some size 11s. And then a first color of SuperDuo beads. I go with this really pretty, it's like a matte metallic silver. Yeah, see, it's a silver metallic matte. It's really neat. That one caught my eye with the turquoise. I thought that would be a really fun color to do. So the first thing you'll want to do is just go ahead and string one of the S11 beads, and then one rondelle, and another S11. And I usually run down to the bottom at this point and establish my tail length, which doesn't need to be too long. You're just going to leave it in, but giving yourself enough room to maneuver is good. So 7 inches or so. That's kind of my usual go-to is about 7 inches. And now we're going to need 6 of these SuperDuos. And I've called my first color, color A in the handout. And just pick up 6 of those. And now we're going to go back through all the beads. So go back through the 11, rondelle, and the 11. Then I'm going to try to go through all the SuperDuos and come back out and exit on the other side there. This can be a little tricky, but you know, if just kind of give it a tug right here and it will tighten up a little bit. And this step I'm doing here where I'm reinforcing it, it's just really helpful. And the reason that I like doing that is because it tightens up everything. It adds a little bit of time, but it's worth doing. And it'll make it a lot easier when you're working on the next steps, because things won't start coming loose on you. So I know it seems like it's taken a while, but just a little extra step there that will save you later. And we didn't mention in the beginning, and apologies, I forgot to mention that, but this class is recorded. And it will be available in a replay, but it won't be available in the usual spot. Normally, the free classes, you can find those by going to michaels.com/classes, but you're going to get an exclusive link for this class because it's not one of the free classes. So that'll be, I believe it's emailed on Monday or Tuesday. And of course, you can reach me on various, channels. You can go to my website or social media and find me there and ask me if you can't find it, and I'll help you get it. All right, and so where am I right now? I'm exiting from the last SuperDuo. So I want to show you a little up close spot so you guys know where I'm at. So I'm on the inside hole, and these, SuperDuos, because they have 2 holes, it gives us a little place to turn. And I'm still working with the inside hole of all of those SuperDuos. I went through it 2 times, and now I'm exiting from that last one over here on the side. And I'm going to do a turn. And to do that turn, I'm just going to go through the outside hole of that bead. So we've exited from that inside, and I'm just going to go through that outside hole. And that puts me right in position to start adding to my my design. And at this point, I am going to switch colors. I'm going to switch over to another SuperDuo color. And this one, I know I say it's my favorite every time. They're all my favorite, but this one's really one of my favorites. It's the like kind of two-toned. I don't know how to describe it really. It's turquoise, but like this bronze wash on it. Not cool. I use that one a lot. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the top hole of the next one, and it's going to make a little fan. And I'm going to do 2 more. It'll bring me to the edge over here. And there's already something really cute that has lots of possibility to become a really cool design element. But to build onto it, I'm gonna stay with the current color that I'm using. But you could switch it to another color if you wanted to, or you could switch back to this one. You could also work at solid color, whatever you like to do. But we're going to do that same trick we did before where we turn, because we want to be going through the outside hole of the SuperDuo. So we went through the last outside hole of the silver one, the color A, and I'm going to do a jump and come down through the outside hole of the next one. So going just right down through those. And now you're in a spot to add more SuperDuos. And this is one of those things where play with this, because you could come up with more things. What I did for this design was I put 1 here. So just added 1. And now I'm going to add 2 because I want it to kind of fan out more in the middle. But that is all just, that's all just design. This would work with different counts. That's what I was trying to say earlier, is definitely try your own counts there and see what you like. So there's 2 more. So I went 1 here, 2, 2, and I'm going to end with 1 for some symmetry on that side. And there it is, starting to look like the original design here. She's got 1 more layer to go. And the same process again, where we do a little turn to go to the outside hole. And I know it's a little confusing and hard to see, so I'm just going to go really slow here to show you. But there's, again, there's the one we're exiting from, and then the one we just added. And we're just going to go through the outside hole of the one we just added. So I'm turning and going through that one. And now I'm ready to add more. If I wanted to. Actually, we're done. I didn't do a third layer on this one. Now you guys know what I'm up to. I have another one, a surprise for later where there's a third one. So I confused myself, but in this one, I actually stopped with that row. Sometimes remembering what I did is often surprisingly challenging for me. All right. So I went back out of, I had turned and gone through this top one, but I just came back out of that. So now I'm back where I was when we added the last bead. Sorry about that, guys. I'll give everybody a second to catch up with where we are. Anyone have any questions about that? I added a turn there we didn't need to do because we're not going to do another layer, just stopping with that layer.
Danielle, you're good on the sidebar right now.
Okay.
I can see some of our friends stretching and pulling on their cords. Sharon's arm is like high in the sky. So clearly she's cut a very long piece of cord. Pat's waving. I'm just looking through to just catch up. Oh, I see Paula. Hi, Cindy. I'm just looking. A lot of people don't have their screen on. That's okay. But sidebar is good. So I think everyone's following along and we're at a good pace.
Awesome. Okay, great. Yeah, it's so quiet. I wondered if anyone had questions or what I've done here is I've just finished that last layer and then I had made a turn to go down through the other one, but we really just want to stay here. So we're going to stop with that layer. There's a couple other design elements that you can make that have more, they keep going. And I encourage you to play with that because it's really fun. I have something on my mat downstairs where I did that this morning. And it's looking really cool. So I can't wait to share that. If I finish it today, I will. But for this design, we want to turn and go up through that SuperDuo. So again, we're exiting from this one. We added our last SuperDuo here. We came up through this bead. And now I'm turning and going down through that first silver one.
Danielle, while you're doing that, a really quick question from Kelly.
Sure.
Do you use different color thread depending on the beads that you use?
I do, yeah, except for not when I'm teaching. You guys are always going to see me using this one because it's just a lot easier to see. But at Michael's, they have this in green and in gray and in white. And that can be very, very fun, and it can make it easier for you to hide your thread. I don't remember exactly what I used on this one. I think it's possible I used gray here. I think I did because I was trying to hide it. And for sure, if I'm going to send something up to John Bead for photography, I'll absolutely match the thread to it because in a photo, that thread really, you can see it very, very profoundly. And so it's nice to hide it. So I was just trying to match it, but then it can be really fun to contrast too. Like you could take a bright colored thread and put that on a bead that it complements and make that the point of seeing it. So that's something to play with too. I think there's really just what you like. And so I'm going to just recap where I was. I exited from here and I turned and I went through this SuperDuo. So now my thread's exiting from the outside hole of that first one. And I hope that's easy to see. I'm going to do something next. I'm going to turn again and go up here. So I'm really just trying to travel. I'm trying to get to the top of my rondelle so I can put a loop on top of it. And so there I am. And I've met the tail. I'm just pushing the tail out of the way for now. Okay, and so now we just want to put a nice loop on the top of this that we can use to attach it. And this is another place where you can experiment and make the loop a different size. If, for example, you wanted to stop here and make this a cool fan earring, you can make your loop bigger. But I wanted it to exactly hug. And so I went with 7, but I encourage you to play with the count because sometimes counts can be different for different rondelles. Slight variation in coating can make a bead fit differently. So you just want to play with that and see what happens. So I'll often try 6, 7 here. How many do I have? I need one more. I'll try different things. That's kind of how I usually work it. But 7 really worked for me for both this design and this one. They are the same rondelles and they're both using the size 11 seed beads. And 7 really worked. So start with 7, see what you like. And if it doesn't look right, then you can always change it. One thing to note though, is it helps if you can have an odd count, because you're going to be using that single bead there at the top as a center point to stitch through when we get to this next step. So if you don't have an odd count, that's okay. If it looks beautiful with an even count and you just really want to use an even count, I believe you could just go through 2 to center it. We'll play with that. If anyone has any questions or they get stuck on that, we can talk about that, how to make it, how to make it work with what looks good to you. So from here, we just really need to weave in. And one of the things I did in the handout was I scribbled out the thread path for how to reinforce this last row, because these are kind of loose. And if you're like me, you probably want them to be just a little more, since they are a design element that you want to kind of fan and hold its shape a little bit, especially if it's going to be an earring. You probably want to reinforce it. So from where I am here, I went down through the SuperDuo on the other side. So that's the inside hole. That's kind of right underneath our 11s there. Went through that. And then I turned and came back up. And went back down through the outside hole of this one. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to get to my last row and reinforce it. And this is where having a size 12 needle is a little handy because it helps you get through more than one at a time. But don't force it. If you're stitching on and it really just only wants to go through one bead, it's better not to break a bead. Just go through the one. Let's see, it might let me go through 3 here. That's kind of crazy. There we go. All right. And so from here, I'm just going to go ahead and weave in. I'm going to come back up through here. And a lot of you guys who've taken classes with me, you know that I typically don't knot, but there's nothing wrong with knotting. I think I just like the look of weaving it in more. I'm always afraid you can see my knot. Most of the time, if I'm looking at someone else's work, I can't see their knot, but it's just a thing with me. So I'll weave in a little bit and I'll use my SuperDuos as a place to turn. But if you wanted to do a knot, you could also just do half-inch knots by going around your thread. And if anyone wants to see that, just let me know. I'll go ahead and show that. And another trick for getting through these tight SuperDuos is you can always just go through one and then go push to the other side through the work, if that helps. It's letting me go through flat on this one, but some of them, it's easier to get through if you, for example, see I'm going through, but I'm coming out the other side. That's a helpful way to get through a tight SuperDuo. Okay, I'm just going to turn using my SuperDuos as a way to lock in my thread. And that's probably a good place as I need to trim. Well, I'll show you a half-inch knot before I do that, in case anyone's going to do that. So there's a piece of thread inside there, right? We're going to just catch it by going through here, pull a loop, and then come through your loop. And you'll get a little knot there. You can do that a couple times, but after each knot, go through a bead before you trim it. And there's part 1. So I'm going to find my scissors. And I'm going to trim this. If you use a burner, this is a great place for a burner. But if you don't have those handy, you can still use your scissors just by push down with the scissors and pull up. with your thread to create like a little tension. And usually my thread just kind of hides itself right back in there. So that's great. I'm going to leave my tail for now. I'm not going to weave it in just yet. What I am going to do is flatten it. Save myself doing that later, because I'm going to want to put a needle on it. When we connect our other piece that we're about to start, I use this as a way to go back up through and reinforce it. So keep that handy. And we're done with this piece for now. I'm just going to set it aside. And the next piece, it's the one that looks the most elaborate. It's actually pretty easy. We're just going to go ahead and create a layer of like a circle together of rondelles and SuperDuos and size 11s. And then on the edge, there's some size 6 beads that you can use that as a way to bring in a third color and give it some pop. I grabbed some orange for us for that. So I'll need those in a little bit. I'm going to get some more thread. I wonder if this is enough thread. It might be. The amount of thread that you need for this one is a little bit more than the last one, about 45 inches or so. Try to get away with 40 inches. I'm going to work with what I have and hope it's enough. I think it's a little shy of that. You know, actually, I think I'll cut new. I cut too much on my last step, so I'm going to save that over there. Maybe in case we restart, I'll use it for that. Here's a longer length. And so just flattening that one. Okay, so same thing I did before, just threaded the needle, and kind of pull that down, fold it over. And now we need 2 more rondelles. I have those handy here. And again, I'm going to try to leave a 7-inch tail to give myself something to weave with at the end. You can always leave more too. You know, sometimes it's better to leave a little bit more. Your counts will still work. Your thread length will still work even if you leave a longer one. I might leave a 10 because I'm going to use this to reinforce. Okay, and so I'm going to pick up one of the rondelles first. Sorry. And again, leaving that 10-inch tail. If you have a measure handy, go ahead and measure it. If you don't, sometimes I just use my bead mat to decide how long of a tail I need. And then pick up, we're going to do a repeat of Duo and S11. So Duo S11, Duo S11. And keep going until you have 5 duos. So there's that. You'll need another rondelle at that point, and then just repeat that one more time. So a duo and an S11. Making sure I've got 5. And slide that down. Okay, and now I want to go back through the first rondelle and all the beads again. And this is another one of those reinforced steps that, you know, it takes a long time, but it'll make it easier. Things stay together better that way. See how loose everything is? That's why it's really great to have this one little step of going around everything again. See, it doesn't seem as wonky after that. My threads keeps catching on my keyboard. Give me 1 second. I'm going to get rid of that. It's still pretty loose, so I can get through all those pretty nicely. And when you get back to your first rondelle, go ahead and go back through that as well. And then I always take the opportunity to tighten by pulling on the working and tail thread. So I've got this design tightened up. Gonna flip that SuperDuo. And just like before, we've got SuperDuo beads with 2 holes, so we have a place to turn. But I want to be going this direction. And I think the reason I did that originally, I think you could probably make it work if you went the other way, but I thought it was easier for me to line it up by traveling back this way, because getting these first, we're gonna put 4 SuperDuos on top of our rondelle, and it looks like this really cool fan. And it was tighter for me if I went this way than if I went this way. And so that's why we're going to do this kind of unusual turn. So I'll go really slow through it, but please let me know if there's questions about it. But I'm going to continue. So I'm in that rondelle, right? Exiting from that rondelle. I'm going to continue through the next SuperDuo bead. And then I'm going to turn and go through the top hole of that SuperDuo. And now I'm where I need to be to string the top of my pendant. So here's 4 SuperDuos, and I switched to color B. I'm just getting that tail out of the way. And I'm going to go over the rondelle, just jump over it, and then go through the outside hole of that next SuperDuo bead. And don't worry too much if it doesn't fan exactly like it's supposed to yet. It probably won't stay in position until you get the stabilizing beads on that last row. So just put them where they need to be and keep your tension tight, but not, crazy tight. And then just keep going. Okay, so now I need my size 60 beads. Let me get this really pretty color out. There's those. And I want to fill in all these spaces with a 6. I just wanted to try something new. And my other one I used like a turquoise luster. And that was really pretty. But I'm going to do orange for this one because it's really going to pop. I'm really going to be able to tell it apart from the other beads around it. And just something for a change. Looks kind of cool. And I'm kind of selecting for beads that are a little bit rounder. It's not critical, but I just kind of look for ones that match each other a little bit for consistency there. I've got 4 more of the SuperDuo beads. Oh yeah, and I just saw a comment pop up. I forgot to turn it off, so I like seeing the comments. But there's yeah, I love seeing the pop of the beads going boop boop boop. Oh yeah, and the orange are these guys here, size 6. We did a reel on Insta where they go pop 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 pop, and you just see it step by step, and that was really fun to put together. I enjoyed that. It was Carmi's idea too. She's like, hey, you should do that. So it was a really cool video. I find it mesmerizing. I'll sit there and watch on TikTok other videos like that where people are putting their beading work together and they just show, kind of sped up steps. I just sit there and scroll. It's so fun. Okay, there's one more. All right. Okay, and so what you'll have is something that's starting to look like our design there, and it's still really loose. Don't panic if it's feels like it's kind of fall apart on you. That's how it is for me too right now. It's going to get a lot tighter when we add the extra round. And so all we're going to do now is we have to make another one of those little turns from where we are. We just added our 6 and we went through that SuperDuo bead. We're going to use one of the 4 we added in the first part of that last step as a place to turn. And then we're going to start adding size 11. And so how that looks is I need to continue and go through that first SuperDuo of my 4 in color B. So I'm going right through that first one. And then using the open hole, the outside hole to turn. So I'm going to go back through that. And now we're ready to go around again, right where we need to be. And so for this part, just start with 1. This is 1 size 11 CP. And jump over that SuperDuo and go through the size 6 bead that we just added. So I got 1 size 11 on the needle and I'm going through that 6. And you should get something that looks like that. It'll just sit right on top of the SuperDuo. And now I'm going to pick up 3. And I'm going to repeat this 3 times. So here's 3 size 11. And we're actually, what we're doing right now is peyote stitch because we're skipping a bead and going through the up bead. 3 more, go through the next 6 there. Here's 3 more. If you need to help them a little bit, I usually do, especially toward the bottom there, but if you get something that kind of looks like that. And I'm going to pick just 1 up now. So here's just 1 size 11. And now we're kind of symmetrical with what we've done on the other side. For the top, what I did for the top is I put 1 size 11 bead in between those first 2. And in the middle here, we're going to put 2 size 11s. So here's 2. And then just going through the top hole of that next SuperDuo bead, you'll get those 2 sitting there. Let's get 1 more. Here's the 1 and 1 more. And so there's side 1 done in the bottom of the first part. So again, I need to put 3 in between each of my 6s here. Here's 3. There's 3. Okay, and here's 1. Here's where we are so far. We've got 1. I just need to match here on the top what we did on the bottom. So 1, 2, 1. So here's the 1. Before I keep going, there's an important step here. We need our other piece. So here's the one we made earlier. So where we are right now is we added 1 bead and we're ready to put 2 beads here in the center of those to kind of match what we did down here. But before we do that, if you're connecting like we are here, just pick up 1 size 11 and then bring in the other pendant over. Count to the middle. So we had a total of 9. We added 7 and there were these 2 that were already there. So we had a total of 9. So I'm just going to come up here and go through this 5th one. So you should have, if you have a different count than me, just try to go through your center one, whichever one is the center for you, for your design. And if you have more like an even count, you can maybe make it work with just going through 2. Just play with it. You could potentially also go through 2 and just directly join it instead of adding beads here, right? So lots of things you can do. Definitely play with that. This is not the only way to connect it. You can connect it lots of different ways. And I went through that center. Now I'm picking up one more. And I'm going to go through that SuperDuo bead. And so what we're looking at here is like a little, I don't know how to describe it. It looks like a little X maybe. And so that's how I did it for this design. But again, just go ahead and try different things. If you had an even count on this one, try just coming out of this bead, going through 2, going back through that bead, see if that works. It might fan out the duos too much, or it might be exactly right. I'm not sure. But that's one way you could get around if you had an even count there. Otherwise, just go ahead and try grabbing your center bead. You add one, go through the center, add one, and then go through the SuperDuo. So here's one more SuperDuo for the other side. And there we are. It's a little tight though. So all we have left to do now is just weave this in. And a couple of things that I thought about doing was using my tail thread on the original piece, because it's in a really unique spot to come back up and go and reinforce. You can also take the tail here on this piece and use it to reinforce. So in both cases, you have to do a little bit of a wonky turn, but it'll be easier than the alternative, which is using this working thread to kind of steer around and find your way back. So what I typically do is I just bring this up and weave it in. But there's always more than one way to do things, right? But I would recommend reinforcing that connection at least with one more pass. And one pass is actually probably just fine. I think that's actually what I did on mine. I'm gonna try to go through my duo so I can use a little turning spot. I end up going to the 6 here. And another great use of your extra working thread would be to reinforce this top part, because that's where we're going to either have a jump ring or a chain going through it. Decide now what you're doing. Actually, that's a really good little spot of advice here. If you're making an earring, go ahead and reinforce this. But if you're going to join it to a chain like we're doing, don't worry about it yet, because we have to pass through that again a couple times. So maybe leaving it without a pass is a good thing. So I guess it kind of matters what, what your goal is for your design. I'm going to actually turn here. So I went through that SuperDuo and go through a few more and then try to trim it. That should be fine there. Okay, so going back to my tails, which one do I want to use? Gotta pick one. If I use this one, I've got to turn here and come down and turn again. If I use this one, I've just got to turn around. I'm going to use the tail we left on the first piece. And I was trying to remember why I did that originally, and I think the reason is because I have another little turning trick I could show you. It's always handy to share an extra tip. So right now where we are with our tail thread is it's exiting from the S11 that we strung first, and that very first step, it's kind of just hanging out there. But I want to go back up through this. And the fastest way to get there is actually to just use a thread bridge as a place to turn. So I'm going to use that thread bridge. I'm going to go under it. And again, this is optional. You could just weave around to get where you need to be. But I found this worked. And I'm going to go back through my 11. a little tight. And all that'll happen when you do that is the thread will just sit on top of the SuperDuo, and it also reinforces it a little bit. So there's a lot of good from doing that. And if you're worried about it not looking as thick on the other side, we can come back over here and do it again. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to go up through all three of those. And keep going. And there we go. I just got a chance to reinforce it. And I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to come back down. That last little bead, we had a lot of passes through it. So if it's tight for you, gently try your pliers, but don't insist on it. It'll break the bead. But that one went through pretty gently, so I'm good. So here I'm going to go through the thread bridge again. I'm just turning around. Sometimes I feel like weaving in takes more effort than actually stitching it. This is going to be a tight one. I think it's going to be okay. Another thing I thought of doing, and it wouldn't actually dimensionally hurt it too much, but maybe using a 10 for just those two beads might be interesting. I might play with that at some point. Okay, and that is the last pass through that bead. But now we have a more symmetrical look on this side. So they both kind of match, see? And if you were using a thread that was not contrasting, like I'm using, it would just blend. It wouldn't stand out too bad. So let's head back up and go this direction. I was able to get through all four there, so I'm just going to go with it. And now I want to go into the big pendant. So to kind of give some symmetry to that. And I'll knock over here. A good place to knot if you're doing knots, catch the thread that's exiting from your 6 and going into your next SuperDuo. Because it'll hide your knot behind those 3 S11s that we added. And then go through the duo, because knots have a really hard time going through SuperDuo beads, so it's a great way to lock them in. If you're going to knot, that's one way to do it. And then go ahead and trim that. Okay, just one more to go. I'm going to do it really fast. Let's flatten this. And if anyone wants to see, I think I'll go ahead and show this, just in case you're going to use your remaining tail thread from your big pendant to do the reinforcing. I'll show you how to get there from here, because you're going to be exiting from your rondelle. You'll need to turn. So go through that next SuperDuo bead. And then back through the outside hole of that SuperDuo. And then just head down through the SuperDuos here. And so from here, I could turn. I'm not going to do it because mine's really tight. I've already got 2 passes through it, but if you wanted to, you could come down there. And you know, it's actually letting me, so why don't I go ahead and just do it? So now I've got 3 passes through that connection. That's looking pretty solid. But I know over here, I'm not going to be able to get through that bead again because it's so tight. I got another trick up my sleeve. I'm going to go down through just the first 4. So here we go. Sorry, first 3. Because the one I can't get through is that one, right? Go through that rondelle. And that'll be just fine too. And now that I'm over here, I have a choice. I can come back up through and you weave in again, or I could be really crazy and I could knot here. So if anyone loves knotting, here's another great place to knot, because your knot will hide in the rondelle. Let's go ahead and come through, pull up a loop, go up through there. And then if you can get through this bead on this side, which I typically can get through about 4 times, and I have only gone through that one 3. So I think I'm good to go through that one more time. And there we go. You can trim it right there. So we've got our pendant all done, all woven in. I'm ready to go.
Danielle, you're great for time.
Oh, good. I was just looking.
No, you're great for time.
Okay.
So just watching you do that, the thing I like about your classes is there were several points in today's class that you could have stopped and made earrings or a smaller pendant. So I love the first component by itself. I love the second component by itself. And then together they're spectacular. So I can definitely see myself making the top one all by itself to wear as earrings.
Yeah, that would be beautiful. And then what I was playing with earlier today was I was making, you know how we put 2 beads here? If you put a size 8 there instead of the 2 11s, just put a size 8 and then come along and make another one. When you get to the spot where you would add these 2, go through the 8 on the first one. And you could keep doing that indefinitely and you would have a bracelet that can go all the way around. Yeah. And I really want to try that. That's something else that I wish I'd done that. I have so many ideas and then I have to pick one, right? And so that was one that I wish I thought of earlier because I would have chosen that. But then this one, I got to that point where I had this really, very ornate bracelet. And if you're wearing like a really ornate bracelet, you may not want to go super bling on the earrings, or maybe you will. I mean, you totally could, but I wanted a little like less extra on my ears since I was going to go big on my wrist. So what I did is I took this one and I made this an earring by itself, but I added 1 extra layer down here. And I was able to get 2 SuperDuos in between all but the center. And then I linked them up at the bottom with some size 11s, and it had a little fan. There was a little picot at the bottom. So a little earring and bracelet set version that you could get out of this design. It's really changeable.
So Danielle, in terms of, we went hard for the first, not quite an hour yet.
Yeah.
I want to make sure you have a second to get a glass of water. I want to make sure everyone who tuned in has a chance to run to the take a little break in the washroom if they need it. So we'll take about a 3 or 4 minute break. Few of you are actually beading along, so you can definitely catch up. But we almost need some music to play for a few minutes, but I'll have you hold for about 3 minutes, Danielle.
Okay.
And let everyone get caught up.
Yeah, and if anyone has a question for me, I do have the chat popping up here. I can see it. So if anyone wants to ask me questions while we're waiting, I've got my water.
That's what I want to make sure, that you brought yourself some water for this class.
I remembered this time. I forgot before, but this time I did. I was just starting to need it.
Danielle, Sharon pointed out something that I put in our post last night. Really, this is all trial and error until you find the right sizes that work. We get to see it finished, so we don't have to try as hard, but I don't veer from your pattern. So if you say 6-0, I use 6-0. I know I'm seeing you guys nodding along with me. I'm not at the point where I can experiment and say, I know she said 6-0, but let me try 8. So I'm definitely not there. I follow whatever bead you recommend to a T. But I think now, after so many classes, I'm starting to understand how, if I did try something else, trial and error, try 7 versus 5 or 9 versus 7, I'll definitely try it in the future.
Oh yeah, for sure. I kind of want to put the start of every pattern. Don't follow the pattern exactly. Like, try something different if you want to, because that is how you discover. I also thought about maybe, I don't know if you like this idea, but I thought about showing all my bloopers. I have a bucket of them. I eventually cut them up and recycle the beads, but I have a bucket of stuff that in my head was amazing and not so much when I made it.
Okay. Well, then while we're waiting, who wants to see the bloopers and feel better?
Yeah, I have to bring those next time.
Yeah.
For various reasons, one or another, you know, some of them worked and some of them, you know, maybe I thought there's no way I could duplicate that. So I would, you know, like not continue, but, or I kept messing it up myself. I was doing one where it was a herringbone rope with SuperDuos in it and they spiral up. And I thought, oh, this is epic. I love this. I got about halfway through it and I kept having to pull beads out because I couldn't remember. There's a little spot where you have to remember to do something and I kept not doing it and I'd get 5 rows up and have to pull it all out. After I did that 3 times, I'm like, you know what?
Yeah, been there.
I'm not gonna do that one. So, but it's very gorgeous. It's amazing. If I can ever finish it, I don't know if I ever will. But lots of things like that, and then lots of things that just didn't fit together, right? They didn't work.
Well, I have learned my lesson. I'm not good at substituting 10 O's for 11 O's. Things get really, really wonky when I do. So I definitely stick to your pattern.
Oh, I try to make it forgiving to those, but sometimes it's hard because they really is kind of a profound difference between a 10.
I will say a year and a half ago, I didn't think there was that big of a difference between a 10-0 and 11-0, and now I know there's a huge difference.
Yeah, they are. I feel like it matters. Width matters more than the height on a bead in a pattern. Yep. So that's where the difference comes in, but definitely doesn't mean don't try it though. For sure, try it.
You have to use what you have sometimes. All right, Danielle, I think everybody is good and back. I hope you had a comfort break.
Yeah.
Cindy just said, you know, she has so few 10-0s that she almost always has to substitute to 11, and she hasn't had a problem yet. So that's awesome.
Awesome. That's good to hear. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'll just start sharing a little bit about the chain really quick and what I did and what worked and what you could do instead. You know, there's a lot of different things. Let me start with what I did and then I'll show you some alternates at the end. But what this design was, whenever I make a beaded chain, the 2 most frustrating parts are I'll end up having to go through the whole chain in order to reinforce it. And if I need to add thread, I really am kind of stuck because I have to go back through the whole thing. So I like creating places to turn. And that was the inspiration for how to do this, was creating little junctions where you can add thread, you can reinforce places. And kind of accidentally, I came up with another idea that you could make one of these a little bigger and it could be a buttonhole. Or you can make them all fit the button that you're using and it would be a really cool bracelet. So there's so much you can do, but for this design, I connected and used those top 2 size 11s as a way to go through it. And, you know, after I made this, I looked back at it and I thought, well, it would also be amazing if you put a size 8 there and just went through the size 8. That would work too. I like both. So I'm going to show, of course, the version that, you know, I did originally, but, you know, with the note that absolutely you could change it up if you want. And so there's a couple different ways you can work this. I'm going to work it the way that I originally did for this, but you could work the chain separately and then connect it at the end. That's not how I wrote it up. In the handout, I start by bringing in the strand directly in, and that's what I'll show today. But you don't have to do it that way, especially if it's getting you know, where you've got a lot of thread catching on the pendant and things are going crazy. You can always change that. You'll need about 60 inches. So the rule of thumb that I wrote out for thread was decide what length you want in the beginning. So like where you want your pendant to hang, and maybe measure it with a tape measure. Come along and cut 3 times that amount, about 3.5 times. So I'm going to do an abbreviated version, so I'm not going to cut a ton of thread or I'll be hitting the camera and stuff. So for me, I'm just cutting a small amount, but for this design right here, I cut probably 65 inches or so. I think that's about what I did. And this design is, of course, it's 21-inch length. So the pendant hangs kind of like starting at 21 inches, the pendant hangs down from 21 inches. So it's down to like 24, 23, 24 or so. Okay, so I've got my thread going. And same thing as before, I'm just gonna flatten the end. And the first thing we're gonna wanna do after you get your needle threaded and brought down a little bit, let's get this out of the way, is you wanna leaving a 10-inch tail, go ahead and string a stop bead. And the way to do a stop bead, in case that's new for anybody, is to go ahead and just bring a bead on. A smaller bead works better for a stop bead than a larger one. And get that tail measured out for the length that you'd like it to be. And then come back up through that bead. So I'll usually just kind of pinch it where I left it so that I have that tail length I'm going for. I'll pinch it where I left it and then pull through and end up with a little bead knot. So later when you want to get rid of this, you can just pull it out. You just pinch it and pull it. But for now, it's going to help us a lot so we don't lose our beads on one side. Okay, so once everyone's got their stop bead, you'll want to string 5. So this is kind of how I started mine. I just did 5 S11s, but to give you an idea of what it's going to look like, let me bring this other sample back out. If you wanted this little point to be closer to where you start your pendant, you can change this count. This is not one of those set in stone counts. This was just what I did, right? You can absolutely change that. Whatever number you do here, we're going to make sure you match it on the other side so that they kind of, hang in the same spot. But that's what we're doing. And what we're going for in between each of these other ones is a total of 9. So this is just 5 plus 4. So a total of 9 there. That's what I did. Okay, so there's my 5 S11s. And here's my pendant. Now go through both of those top beads here. And I'm not reinforcing it yet because we're going to be back. We're going to come back, back this way after we work one side. We'll come back down the other. So 5 more plus 4. So I'll show you in steps so you can see the symmetry of it. So here's 5. And now I'm going to go ahead and string 4 more. And there's 4 more. And it doesn't look symmetrical right now, but when we come back down, we're going to connect with that 5th bead. So for now, you're going to have 9 on this side, and just don't worry about it at this moment. Okay, so once you've got the 9, then you'll need a 6 and a SuperDuo bead and another 6. And don't worry about which side. It's gonna spin around for a little while. 9 more. There's 9 more, and same thing again. Do this for the entire length that you would like your chain to be. And I actually thought originally when I was doing this that I was just going to leave it like that. I liked the point, but my points were spinning around a bunch when I wore it. So I decided I wanted to lock it in. But you could leave those as little points. That looks cute. And who cares if they spin, right? It'll look really great. There's 9 and a 6 and a SuperDuo and a 6. And I'll do a few more so you can see, something like, what we're going for. I'm going to need more 11s. There's just 9 of those. And when you get to the last one, where you think you're going to stop, you won't add a number 6 afterward. So I'll show you what I mean. We'll make this next one my last one, and then I'll probably just maybe put a chain on top because I don't want to do the full length. That would take much longer, I think. But here's 9 more. Okay, so there's 9. And this is my last one. So I'm just going to do a 6 and a SuperDuo. I'm not adding my another 6 on top just yet. I'm going to wait and do something different. Okay. And so again, this is something you can change this up if you want. But what I did for the handout is I just picked up 6 beads here. I'm going to switch that first one. First one was a little wonky. Okay. So there's 6 beads, and now come back down through the SuperDuo bead. You'll get a little loop there. And what I like to do at this spot is I go ahead and reinforce it, but I'm gonna go down 1 and turn here. So 1 more size 6, 9 more 11s. And another size 6 seed bead. I keep sliding over, sorry guys. And I'm going to go through my duo. So going through that second hole, SuperDuo there. And at this point, you'll notice errors. Like if you did a different count here, it'll stand out to you. I did that on this one. One of these has 8. Nobody can guess which one it is. It doesn't stand out. So don't sweat it too much. Just match it. If you'll see if you're coming along, you're like, oh, no, I didn't get mine over here. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. I'm going to reinforce this. So I'm going to turn. I'm going to come up through. Go through here. Try to get as many as I can. Oh yay! Look, I got all of them and the SuperDuo. Okay, just tightening that up. Now I want to go through all of those beads. My tail's on the way there. Back through the SuperDuo. And I'm going to go through the 6 here. At this point where I am right now, if you wanted to, you could reinforce that loop again. And I think I'll do it just to show you, but go through, use the SuperDuo to turn now. The reason I turned here first, I did that for tension reasons. It's really hard to get it tight. And once you do this turn, you won't be able to pull and tighten your chain again after that because you've locked it in. So I come down and do 1 first and then come back up. And then I can use the SuperDuo to turn and do 1 more reinforcing. I hope that makes sense. It was a little easier for me when I did it that way, I found, than trying to make it tight up here. All right, and I'm just getting ready to be traveling down through all these if I can. Almost, yeah, I made it. Okay, gonna get through that SuperDuo. And now I'm going to do 1 more thing. I've got this loop here. It looks pretty good, but it could be better. So if you have handy, and you don't have to use round nose pliers, I've got round nose pliers handy, so that's what I'm using. But if you had like a crochet hook or even just a little dowel or anything, just come along and make it pop. I do that before I take a photo. So like if I'm going to do my jewelry photography, right before a photo, I will go and pop out all of my loops and make them look perfect. And then take my picture, and they'll collapse down again. When you put the jump ring on them, they're going to move around, but sometimes they hold their shape. So especially once you put something in them, like if I had a couple jump rings, maybe a chain and a charm, that's my chance to, you know, make it the shape I want. So that's what I did. Let me get some more 11s out. I need 9 of these. This will use in a lot of a size 11 beads. And here's a size 6. So 9 11s and a 6. And then go through that other hole on the next SuperDuo down. And I'm just going to do that again 2 more times. And you got to remember to add the S6 afterward. What am I doing here? Am I still on the screen? I keep moving.
Danielle, you're good. I wanted to just interject because I can see Sharon. She's saying what I'm thinking is it's so simple, but it looked so complicated. And I didn't know how you were going to do this. I actually thought it was going to be a loop and a loop and a loop. I didn't know you were going to go up one side and down the next. So this is fascinating. And I can think of so many projects where I needed a nice beaded necklace and didn't think I could make one that I would definitely like to showcase some of my pendants, and I'll make them this chain now.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, and what you said before about looping, yeah, you could totally do that. In fact, if you were going to use a pendant that was heavy, like if it was like a heavy gemstone, that would be a totally great idea. And what I mean by that is, so you'd come up here, you'd build it, you'd do your 6, you do your SuperDuo, turn, build the other side, turn, come back up. Build this side, turn, build the other side, turn. That's a square stitch variation of just, you know, constantly coming back in a square. That works great. Both of those, it uses a little bit more thread, but it'll make it tighter, stronger, and more robust. It'll also be less flowy. So to give you a little disclaimer there, doing it this way makes it a lot more flowy. If you do it the square stitch way, which is make a loop down, make the loop go down like that. If you do it like that, it's going to be great, but it will be stiffer. But if you're going to hang a big, you know, gemstone on it, or like, you know, one of our earth jewels pendants, yeah, the square stitch version would be better for that.
Thanks, Danielle. Thank you.
It looks like, did I miss a count up here or did I do something funky? Let's look. 1, 2, 3. I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. 10. Oh, I put 11 up there. That's wild. Well, I could go fix it really quickly, but I think it's okay. I'll fix it later. But yeah, I made too many on that one. And you see how it just automatically, you just see it. Let's see how we're doing on time. We're actually doing okay.
No, don't fix it.
Don't fix it. All right. Perfectionism.
We all agree. We're going to let you have it.
All right. But I was showing that purposely to see. Yeah, I did that on purpose, right? Okay, I didn't, but it's okay. So what I'm doing now, I left my last SuperDuo here, and I've left my working thread just kind of aside. I'm removing the stop bead on the other side. So the one we left when we first started pulling the chain in. This is also another chance to tighten things up. So if you're at this spot and there's any gaps here, you can give it a little pull and it'll fix that. Grab another size 6, and now I'm going to pick up just 4. And we'll bring this over for a visual to explain why I'm only picking up 4 is because I'm going to join the 5 we've got. So I'm going to skip 4 on this side and join it in the 5th one. And again, this is just one of many ways you could do this. You don't have to do this exact way. It's just how I did it. So there's the 4. I'm going to slide that down. And I'm going to try to count 1, 2, 3, 4 and get to the 5th bead. And then I'll just continue through all of them. And I'm going to go through the pendant's top 2. And I'm going to continue all the way through those next 5. Maybe not in one swoop, but that's where I'm headed. Maybe I will do it in one swoop. Let's see. Almost got those 3. Once I remove the stop bead, the tendency to have one of those fly off is not 0. Okay. So I've got my thread exiting from the same place where my tail is and where I pulled that stop bead off. And now that I'm here, it's a really great time to try to reinforce a little bit. I'm not going to make the tension too bad, but just enough that it kind of holds its spot. And now same thing we did.
I'm just going to remind everyone, the last page of your PDF, you did a gorgeous illustration on what how to go through and what you're going through at this point.
Yeah, and I feel like it makes more sense seeing it this way because it doesn't lay out that way in reality, but the structure is easier to see in a square format. But that's all we're doing. We just went through those 5. And so right now, both of our threads are exiting from that bead. And then it's just
handy. That's handy.
Yeah, and it's really easy from here because we're just doing the same thing we did before. I was wondering, do you want me to show the square stitch version going up this side?
I don't know if you should veer off the PDF, Danielle.
Okay, maybe I'll do a video later, show people that. I always get kind of like torn about it, like, you know, should I, because I find this like more time consuming sometimes than the other. And I also prefer like single needle methods for things, but I'll end up using more thread and taking longer to do it with one needle than if I used to. It's kind of one of those scenarios, I feel like. So here's just 4. We're doing the same thing we did before, but we're going to mirror what we did on this side. So 4 beads, and then we need a 6 and a duo and a 6, and then 9 of the 11s. I think because I keep saying 11s that I picked up 11 in that last one. And so there's a 6 and a duo and another 6, and I'm just going to keep going until I have the same amount over here. And while I'm loading these, like there was a couple questions about, well, how do you know what size to make for a button? You would want to test your button on a sample. Just make a little sample and put your button through it, and just adjust this count to fit your button, the number of 11s that you're stringing. There's 9, a 6, SuperDuo, and a 6. How am I doing? I got 1 more to go. And my last, yeah, so I don't need that 6. I'm going to take that off. I'm at my last one, just mirroring what I did on the other side. I'm going to pick up 6 of these. If you were putting on a shank button, a good time to do this is right here. You'd put your S11s, maybe 2, maybe 3, go through the button, and then put the 3 more and then come back down. That would get you a button on one side. And then on this side, you could just do a picot. And by that, I mean, instead of stringing 6, you would just do 3. And the 3 would look like that. We did that in our edging class, the last premium class we had. Sorry, I'm off camera there. So that's one way you could end it if you were doing the button on the other side, and these were supposed to just be button loops. So just a little fun idea. For mine, I'm going to go ahead and finish with 6 so I can put jump rings and a little bit of chain. Here's 3. Okay, and so same thing that I did before. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to add a 6. And I get 9 more of the S11. And I'm going to grab another 6 and come down through this next SuperDuo bead and reinforce. So I want to turn, head back through all of those beads again, keep going. I've had pretty good luck today with getting through like lots of them at a time. It's unusual for me. I'm going to reinforce my loop here at the top. And from this SuperDuo here, I'm going to turn and come back up one more time, get through all my beads again. There we go. All right, now I'm going to go through all of the side. If I can go through all of them at once, let's see if I can. There we go. Wow. Okay, so that like never happens. It just keeps happening. It's really good luck. Go through one more. And same as before, I want to make my loop look good. Same thing here. I do this now because I'm about to put some tension down here, and when I start tightening it, it may not be as easy to make it pop like that. So just did that now. And just start copying. Just copy down the sides. So S6. And then 9 of these. And one more. Okay. Another size 60 bead. Almost there. There's 3, 3, and 3 more. All right. And we're there. So now to connect everything, bring it all together, I'm going to put 4 size 11 seed beads on the needle here. So there's 4. And I want to skip those first 4 on this side and just come down through the 5th one. And it's handy enough on this side because our tail's marking it. So you can see it really easy. Head down through there and go through pendant again. And so now we're just back to weaving in. Everything's all set. And one of the best things about this type of chain, and oh, I did that a lot, but it's an easy fix. I'll show you guys a trick for getting that back out.
Danielle, I didn't get a chance to tell you because Sharon noticed it right away.
Yeah, I did
I was
it a
holding
lot.
holding my breath, hoping you would see it before you went all the way through.
Nope. It's all good though. Now I get to show the trick for pulling it out. I just kind of grabbed all 4 and just pinched them and pulled, and it worked out great. I did that a bunch of times when I was making the sample, and did not notice it. It got all the way down the chain. You know, that was a full length chain too. I did it like 4 times. Seriously distracted driving here. Okay, so back through that one. And I'm going to pull on this tail and use it as a way to kind of leverage my tension a little bit. That's better. There we go. Okay, so for weaving in, you can do it kind of just depends on how many passes you've made through your pendant. My pendant has a lot of great spots for weaving in still. I didn't do a lot of reinforcing on this side. So I'm going to use the rest of my working thread and get rid of it down here. So in the pendant, just going to keep going. Weaving in is so boring. I totally understand that. I'm just going to keep going. And I think I might do my little knot trick again. So why not? I knotted on that side. Remember earlier I did that. I don't remember where I did it. I'm going to do it again. Let's see if it'll let me go through just the SuperDuo. That's what I'm trying to do there. And so I'm going to pick up the thread that is running from this SuperDuo into that S6 because my knot is not going to be super visible. It'll be hidden by my little picot here. It'll hide it. And it's not going to slide back into the SuperDuo because those are typically pretty tight. Knots can't fit through them. So I'm going to go through here, pull up a loop, go through my loop. There's my knot. If I wanted to be really diligent, I would do it one more time. Go through my next SuperDuo, borrow that strand, pull up a loop, get through that, go through the S6, and then trim. That's my scissors. And the other cool part is that here, where we have our tail, we can use the chain to get rid of that. Let's see if I flattened it already. I might have. Okay, so I would just go back up and start making turns, right? There's my first turn. SuperDuos are amazing for locking stuff. They just, the thread doesn't move out from where you put it. And I really like that about them. I'm just going to keep going. That was 2 loops around a SuperDuo. I feel like that's pretty good. I could trim it now, but I might just go one more up. In a real design that I was going to sell, I'd go to town weaving it in. No joke, I really would. You could knot it here, just like we did before. Knot's not going to go back through SuperDuo, so you can just go ahead and give it a knot there. Get up through the 6 and trim it. All right, now we just need to throw a clasp on it. So let's find my findings pack. Any clasp you like is great. And of course, if you'd put a button on one side and done a picot on the other, you'd be completely done right now. All you'd have to do is roll on and button it. But I'm probably going to add a chain to mine later. And I also just wanted to take another look at it and show, even though I made that error in my counts, it's not hugely noticeable. I see it like a, like a fire engine coming, but everyone else probably would not be the first thing they would notice about my piece, that I messed up the count right there and right there. So I just want to point that out in case anybody is like me and takes it to such a level that you'll never finish it.
Paul is thinking that you could take a plier and break those beads.
I could. In fact, if I made it a little tighter tension, I should have done that before I wove it in, because then I could have tightened it up. That is a totally great idea. I should have done that.
Nope. I think you should have to be forced to live with it now.
I'm gonna live with this one because it's already got so much cuteness going on that it just, yeah, I'm happy with it.
So Danielle, last week we learned how to make our own beaded findings.
Yeah.
So this is just one more place we could have our own beaded findings where.
Gosh, you're right. Yeah, I could have. That's a good point. I could have put one of our toggles here.
Mm-hmm.
Those
So many options.
Then it would be so put together. I like that.
So Sheila would like to know if you were using a button closure, would you
Mhm.
make the other side longer?
Yeah, I would overlap it. So especially if it was going to be well, a necklace or a bracelet. For a bracelet, I'd overlap it more so it could be adjustable. But if this
No,
was
but
a necklace,
I think she means like, because it's a button and you know how it adds so much extra space. Do you have to compensate one side of the necklace longer than the other so that it will sit straight?
yeah. So I'm thinking what I would probably do is like, so pretend I have a button here. Um, let's pretend this big rondelle is a button. And that button needs somewhere to go, right? So I would probably make another, at least one more connector here. Because that way, when you clasp it, it's going to do that, right? You're going to have your connecting clasp here and your connected button here, and it's going to center it perfectly symmetrical like that.
We agree. And even Cindy is saying that one of the loops could be what you use right now for a button closure.
Yeah, exactly. And then it gives somebody the option if they're wearing it and they want it to be a little longer or shorter, you could add extra length here and put a little charm at the end. Or you could, make it shorter by buttoning it somewhere down here. Imagine it was a long necklace. Somebody could bring it up a little bit.
Great idea.
And that works for not just this pendant, but any design you're doing. And then of course, wrap bracelets, if you're selling your work and you want to be able to sell it to more than one customer, you can make them fit, up to 8.5 inches and 9 inches. And then it could be buttoned anywhere. And if there's extra, you just go around again and button it again. So you haven't buttoned anywhere on it, right?
That's great, Danielle. We did notice everyone will take away different things from the class. I think a few of us just want to make bracelets now. So
yeah,
that's going to be good to use.
that's where I'm at too. I love bracelets. I make way too many bracelets. Like all our classes would be bracelets if it was totally up to me because that's what I wear. But and earrings. No, I like earrings too. I'm just throwing a clasp on it, but I actually would rather put a little chain because this is going to be way too short. This would fit a doll right now. But yeah, so that's all you'd have to do. Just throw jump rings and then you've got it. And we're doing so good on time. Let's see, what do you think for we could show if there's any questions about any part of this?
I'm just going to check the sidebar. I'm going to let everyone have a second if they would like to ask a question. And I'm just reading from Pat, the reason where she wears long necklaces, she just joins the two sides. No fuss with the toggle or buttons or anything. I agree, Pat, like
Yep.
No findings. Long necklace right over our necks and we're good to go. Paula is amazed at how this bead chain was attached. So that is, that's how I feel as well.
Oh, thanks. That's so cool.
Yeah, one long chain, no stomping.
Yeah, this would be easy to join too, because when you just come back over here, you could just connect it through the same SuperDuo, right?
Perfect.
That'd be cool. I like that.
Sheila is telling you that it's a beautiful design.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sheila.
Now, when we started today, Danielle, I noticed most people did not receive the PDF. So
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure what that is, because usually that happens. So I have sent it, I've emailed it to some people, I've put it on the sidebar. If anybody doesn't have the project PDF before the class is over, you could give me your email address in the direct message, or always you can go to the John Bead Facebook page and private message me so that I'll see it and I'll take care of it from there. But I'll make sure Michaels knows that the PDF wasn't attached.
Yeah, and same with me as well. You guys can find me on there's Instagram, Facebook, and also through my website. You can email me there if there's any questions about the design, and if you're not getting, for example, a link you need, or if you'd like the PDF, I can do that too. So, Yeah, lots
So
of ways.
Danielle, we're really good for time, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff coming up. And so I know both of us wanted to try and show everyone in this class a sneak peek at what was coming in December.
Yeah.
Do you want to try it on your computer?
Yeah, let's do that first, and then I can show the rest of November after that.
Yeah.
And I can show details on all of those. I'm going to share my screen. I sent these. Let's see here if it lets me do it. Okay, so I'm going to hit share. All right. So this isn't in the correct order. It's the class I'm showing here is December 10th, and it's a free class. And this is a design that we felt like looked like a poinsettia. So just a really fun, quick and easy make for the holidays. It's a poinsettia bracelet. And again, that's on December 10th. Here's a few more views of it. Oops, wrong way. There's another view of it. You can see how it's made a little bit. And so it's got a few layers going there. It's right angle weave. It starts off with something that we call the star chain, which you can kind of get a glimpse of it up here. You can see where the SuperDuos are. We created them with right angle weave. So we stitched through and then put them all to that by itself is just a cool idea. You could do a whole chain like that. And so we called that a star chain. So we'll show that first, how to make that. And then we embellished it so that it has just a little more flair, a little more going on, but super versatile because you could do so much. So a lot of great technique stuff gonna be in that class. This next one is the class after that, the December 17th class, and that's our last one for 2021. It's the last class before the holidays. And if you're like me and you have gifts you still haven't finished at that point, you'll love this class because this is a snap. It's really fast. It's just all delicas. I get asked a lot, can I do
We truly apologize. It appears that we have lost Danielle. Carmi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm hoping she comes back.
Okay. I don't even think she realizes that she's.
It's possible she's still chatting, but we can't hear her. So can you put us back onto the regular screen, Felicia?
Because she's sharing her screen,
Yeah.
I cannot actually it's on yours. So she has actually I think she's noticed, so she's kind of shut down. I'm trying to see if she's trying to come back in. So she hasn't come back in. There she is. Here she comes. Hold on one second. Let me let her in.
And while everyone's waiting, I can see Cindy's holding up her finished piece. I cannot believe you got that far in this class. Wow. Wow. Scroll up. Oh, Pat, are you working on the necklace? Paula too? You guys are fast. Oh, Pat, well done. That went really, really quickly. You're going to have a long necklace. Hi, Valerie. I can see you. Oh, I see another yellow version of it that's coming up. Okay. Thank you, everybody. You know, Danielle is quite upset that she's left the screen. So I'm going to give her a couple seconds to come back. The good news is we wanted to let you know that the December classes are slowly but surely appearing. So you'll be able to sign up for them.
Hey guys, I'm so sorry.
Danielle, aren't we terrible with technology?
Well, actually, my network connection just crashed. I'm on cellular data from my phone at the moment. I can bring my phone back up.
No, I actually, I'm going to just let you know the sidebar has been great for the whole class. Not too many questions. While you were gone, a couple people are virtually finished or, getting through it. So that's good news. And so I think, don't try to come back in. I want to just remind people, Danielle's always available on Instagram so she can see her things. And yeah, definitely go to the Michael site to see our upcoming classes for sure.
And Carmi, just so that everyone knows, if they would like, I've already put the December 10th link in the chat. Actually, I just put the class and didn't put the actual link itself. So let me put the link for that December 10th class in there so that if anyone is interested, they can definitely go ahead and sign up. So let me put that link. So this is for the Poinsettia class.
Perfect.
So there's the link.
Oh, thanks, Felicia.
You are so welcome.
So we can hear you, Danielle. So I think on behalf of all of us, thank you everybody for attending the premium class. And usually it'll be Monday. You'll get an email from Michael's giving you your exclusive link to watch the video forever. If you don't receive it, a day or two goes by, you can always ask Danielle or myself, and we'll keep a copy of it. So it was just another great Friday, Danielle.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't get to show the next premium class. That one is, it's a holiday sweater bracelet, but it will be up soon. And I will, I wonder maybe if I could just post it later so we can show people what it looks like.
Definitely.
All right. Yeah, I'll share that photo. And it's the December, I believe that my calendar's on my phone, but it's the first class in December. It'll be that one.
Okay. Felicia, thank you for all your help today.
You're welcome, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, Sharon. Bye, Pat. Bye, Paula.